Hey everybody, welcome to the Did You Know Crypto podcast. Today I'm going to be welcoming Andrew Yang to talk about the long-term use case for Litecoin. But first, if you could do me a huge favor, go to iTunes, leave a rating and review. Also do that wherever else you may be listening to podcasts. Like us, follow us, share us on all the social media pages that you frequent. And if you feel like supporting a little bit more, you can also shop through our Amazon page or help us on Bitbacker. But most of all, I'd like to thank you for listening and enjoy the show. Welcome to the Did You Know Crypto podcast. I'd like to welcome Andrew Yang, also known on Twitter as @eCurrencyHodler. He is a Litecoin proponent, COO of Blockfuse, and creator of LiteSchool. Andrew, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, Dustin.
So, this has been a topic that I've, wanted to kind of get into. I've reached out a couple times to people, just kind of haphazardly to talk to someone in the community. Basically, the biggest reason I want to do is because I leveled criticisms in episode 16, or I should say myself and the guest did, in episode 16 and 18 about, Litecoin's, efficacy long-term. And I thought it was only fair for me to have somebody from the community on the show to basically kind of come on, give the counter arguments to the stuff that I was talking about, to talk things through and just kind of make it a less of a one-sided conversation. But before we actually get into that, I wanted to first, hear your story. How did you get into all this? How did Bitcoin find you?
Yeah, okay. So I heard about Bitcoin because my friend wouldn't stop bugging me about it. And this was back in like 2013, actually. And then I bought Bitcoin for the first time in 2014, and that's when Bitcoin hit like $800. And then I was watching it, and then because it hit 1,000 before that, and I was like, okay, it bottomed out, like I'm good to go. And then so I bought some Bitcoin there, and then this was right before Mount Gox, and and so it crashed to like 300, and so I like cried in my corner. Hid my Bitcoin away somewhere and then just forgot about it. And I was like, I refuse to sell. Like I cannot sell it for less than what I bought. And then, thankfully in 2017, it hit 1,000 and I was like, okay, so I'm selling out. It's going to drop down to 300 again. And then of course it hits 20K. So, but when I sold out at 1,000, I started looking at other cryptocurrencies, primarily through Coinbase. And it was, I saw Ethereum and then I saw Litecoin. And that's when I started really digging deep into the rabbit hole, I guess, of Bitcoin and blockchain and things like that.
Yeah, that was kind of I won't repeat it really again because I've said it on a couple episodes now. But that was kind of almost along the same lines of my story. I got involved in it was like 2013, 2014. And yeah, I got caught in that Mount Gox bubble. That was a fun time. And it was nice in a way though, because it kind of gave me a little bit more perspective on this last go around to kind of go like, okay, like I've seen this movie before. I mean, of course, nobody can time tops and bottoms, but if you've already been through it once, then it's not as long as you're not remortgaging your house or anything like that, it's not that bad. And that just given time, you'll be fine. But so why don't we just jump right in? And I don't know, however long that you want to take, 5 or 10 minutes or 3 minutes or however long, why don't you, kind of lay out your, the overview of Litecoin as you see it and your case for it.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess let's talk about why I think Litecoin is relevant right now. I think right now Litecoin is relevant because it has, honestly, it's something similar to Bitcoin, and it offers cheaper fees, right? And so this isn't necessarily relevant right now or in the sense of like the fee market is like pretty low right now for Bitcoin. But back in November and December of 2017, the fee market was insane. Bitcoin fees were just crazy, and it was killing businesses. Like it was it was pretty brutal. Abra was one of them. Actually, there was a pretty big moment, I think, in 2017 when Abra said, we're going to add Litecoin support to our platform. And one of the reasons is because the Bitcoin fees were just too high, right? And so from their mentality, they were thinking, we want something that is similar but cheaper, right? And then they took a look at Bitcoin Cash, but then, it wasn't like the network security wasn't that good because it's still SHA-256. And so they saw Litecoin and they're like, this is script dominant. It's something similar to Bitcoin, so it won't take too much effort to add infrastructure to it. And it has lower fees, right? Bitrefill was another company that considered Litecoin right during this time when Bitcoin fees were really, really high. Another reason why I think Litecoin has a space in cryptocurrency is because it is a test bed, basically, for Bitcoin. Right. And this actually serves a real purpose, I think. Like the first example when Litecoin was acted as a testbed, I think of SegWit, right? And that was in 2017 too, right? There was a lot of FUD surrounding SegWit, and because the way that Luke Jr. kind of was proposing the soft fork was through something called anyone can spend in the script. And so I personally think it's a fairly brilliant hack, but it creates a problem when you do it as a soft fork. Like the miners could collude to do a 51% attack on Bitcoin to claim all the SegWit transactions after that fork, after the soft fork is implemented, right? And these would be valid on all the nodes that didn't download the new SegWit software, SegWit enforcing software, and it would essentially create a chain split, and that would just create chaos between the two chains, right, in Bitcoin. So my question is, like, how would you test this on Bitcoin's testnet? Because that's a common argument I hear from Bitcoin, I guess, maximalists or people who say that Litecoin isn't actually a testnet, or like, why do we need Litecoin if we have a Bitcoin testnet? But my question is, like, how do you test it, an attack vector like that on a Bitcoin testnet, right? How do you test if someone would be willing to ruin the Bitcoin network to claim all those Bitcoins that are tied up in SegWit U2XOs and continually mine a non-SegWit chain, like on a Bitcoin testnet? You can't, because the financial incentives aren't the same. Like testnet coins, they have no value. Miners have zero incentive to keep testnet secure. And in fact, like Bitcoin testnet, it regularly gets stalled. It regularly, I guess some people would say, get attacked or whatever. There's huge fluctuations in hash rate because random companies come in and they do a lot of testing on Bitcoin testnet. So let's go back to Litecoin. So where does Litecoin fit into this? When Litecoin implemented SegWit first, before Bitcoin, I felt like it kind of proved itself as a testbed for Bitcoin. And it was kind of cemented when Charlie put $1 million of Litecoin in a SegWit transaction, in a SegWit address, and he basically dared people to steal it. And so there was plenty of incentive, a lot of money out there for people to try to perform an attack on Litecoin, to do a 51% attack, to mine the non-SegWit chain, and to claim the $1 million, right? But nobody did it. And so this is something that you just can't do on a Bitcoin testnet. So to me, this bounty basically disproved all the anyone can spend FUD that revolved around it. It proved that miners wouldn't collude, that it actually wouldn't make sense. It would completely destroy the network, and miners would lose all the money that they invested in their hardware because the value of Bitcoin or Litecoin would tank, right? But you don't actually have the same assurances with testnet. And so to me, this was kind of like a defining moment in the history of Litecoin. And people, I think, now see value in Litecoin, see value as a testnet for Bitcoin. For example, like I have my own podcast, and it's called the Light Podcast. And I interviewed Diego Gutierrez from RSK. And he mentioned, he wanted to try to implement drive chains on Litecoin before trying to push it on Bitcoin, right? And so that to me just is an example of how people in the industry are viewing Litecoin kind of as a test bed for Bitcoin. Another example of how Litecoin can help is by adding something like Schnorr before Bitcoin, making sure that Schnorr signatures are okay and good to go in a live mainnet environment that has a market cap of billions of dollars, right? As opposed to just a Bitcoin testnet where people aren't necessarily financially incentivized to break it. And so, yeah, that's kind of like the two main reasons I feel like I really believe in Litecoin and why I feel like it has a purpose in this space. And looking forward in the future, I really do see a strong relationship between Bitcoin and Litecoin when it comes to the Lightning Network and atomic swaps, and how these two currencies can be the gold and silver on the Lightning Network in that sense.
The question I had about the with the testnet use case is that it's just hard for me to wrap my head around it because the position of Litecoin in the community and the team is that they do Litecoin is its goal is to become a global currency, right? Pay with Litecoin, and at least with the testnet thing is that it means to me it means that it's useful for Bitcoiners, but but not so much for actual Litecoin users, because then it's almost predicated partly on getting people to trust their wealth, because anybody that's holding coins, using them, paying with them, is trusting their wealth to the network, as kind of like, well, this is the network that we're going to test stuff on, not on the actual Bitcoin network first. And to me, that would really hurt my confidence. And actually, like, why would I not just hold it in Bitcoin, wait for Litecoin to use it, and then maybe use Litecoin a little bit later? But as an actual global money, it doesn't seem to me that if it was like, we are trying stuff out first because we want to be first, we want to have first mover advantage over Bitcoin, then that would make sense. But as actual just being like a test net seems more of a use case for Bitcoin versus actual Litecoin.
Yeah, like I hear what you're saying, but it kind of has both of those feelings, right? Like we can claim that we're faster than Bitcoin in implementing technology, because we are, because it's so hard to implement anything on Bitcoin, whether it be a soft fork or a hard fork, right? But if there are concerns, if there's any like FUD surrounding implementing new technology, obviously Litecoin core developers would review it and make sure they think it's okay. And if they do think it's okay, then we would implement on Litecoin, and we would have, I guess, what you would say, first mover advantage when it comes to implementing new technology. And so to me, it's like, even though I guess the test bed kind of makes it feel like we're not sure whether the technology is going to work out or not, I kind of feel like I have confidence in the people who are implementing the technology, the Litecoin core developers who would implement it, and in their review of the process and implementing it and making sure that everything's okay. Right? Because like, let's take again, like SegWit, for example. There was FUD surrounding SegWit, and if Charlie didn't know what he was doing, if he didn't know, if he wasn't sure about how the game theory would work behind implementing SegWit as a soft fork, then it would put Litecoin at risk. But I mean, it turned out he was right, and so like there wasn't actually any problem or real issue. It was just like the narrative behind the camps who were against SegWit were just so loud and just trying to create so much confusion that having, once we implemented it on Litecoin, I just kind of felt like it just completely cleared the way, and just silenced all those critics, because nobody stole that $1 million that was tied up in a SegWit address.
And I guess one of the things I wanted to talk, I didn't necessarily want to talk about, but it's one of the things that gets leveled at Litecoin. So I kind of wanted to collect all of the arguments against it that either I have or that some people have, and then just kind of discuss them. So of course you can't talk about, the Litecoin community and arguments against it without talking about, last year with Charlie, selling off his Litecoin. It was, he gave his reasons for it. A lot of people gave him a lot of, shade and fun for that. But it was often, it's basically kind of the narrative is and bandied about that he sold at all-time high, but that wasn't necessarily true. He basically, if I remember correctly, it was like 3 separate occasions throughout the year, and that it wasn't actually, like at when Bitcoin was, or what was Litecoin topped out at 350. I can't remember exactly what it was last year, but anyways, but I was wondering if you wanted to address that issue per se, although I don't think it's necessarily fair for the Litecoin community to have to answer for any one user. Considering that Charlie is the founder and is kind of looked to by the community as a, you probably don't want to use the term leader, but at least someone that has, I don't know, kind of an ambassador, chief ambassador qualities to it. I do think that it is somewhat fair for people in the community to have to, maybe explain that a little bit better than it has been.
Yeah, man, we get this question so much on subreddit, on Twitter. And okay, so I guess like my question to you would be like, why is it so important from your perspective, or why why is it so important for other people like that he sold Litecoin? Like why do you think that's such a big problem?
For me, like on one hand, I understand, like I would have done the exact same thing. Like it makes no sense to me in one way that if I was looking to sell a chunk of my holdings or whatever, or just as a good trade, right, to sell at a higher point and then buy maybe a little bit, like I would have done roughly around the same thing. But the problem is that his reasons were not like I'm selling now because like he released a tweet not that long before, if at some point that year too, saying like expect we could see 90% loss in value from what we're seeing right now, right? So of just going like, right, I'm expecting at some point we're going to see this thing, top out, and then we're going to go down to some sort of bottom. I want to buy back up more Litecoin than I have now, or whatever his reasons. But he cited, conflict of interest as his main concern. And, like I said, I don't fault him for it, but if to me, I don't know. It's that he should have skin in the game. As a head of a project, he should have some of his wealth, or a good chunk of his wealth, tied up in this. If your thesis is we want to make this global currency, global money, pay with Litecoin, the same way that a lot of, especially, although Litecoin's not the same thing as what's the ICOs in 2017, but a lot of them have lockup periods, right, to kind of incentivize the founders when they have stocks in their own companies to obviously do as well as they can to make their value go up. But if he had recognized that conflict of interest as being a main concern, then why wouldn't to me, if conflict of interest and not trying to protect the wealth that I had was my main concern, then I would have waited until we saw the bottom, until we saw 100 or 50 or whatever, and then said, what, I've sold off all my stuff. I waited until we weren't at all-time high. That's what I would have done. Maybe that's probably a lot of hindsight 2020 kind of stuff. But, to me, it's this, I find that the conflict of interest is not, I'm not 100% convinced on it. I don't fault him for it. But my main reason for having a concern about it is more of just, you should have skin in the game. You should, have a good chunk of your wealth tied up in this project that you are saying to a community of people, and have, billions of dollars in market cap, saying like, I trust, I believe in this so much that I've tied up a bunch of my money in it.
Yeah. Okay. So it's just so interesting me to hear people's reasons for this. I feel like people are just upset because it's a bear, because they bought Litecoin at a high price, and they're making up excuses, right? And they're not making logical statements, okay, because they're saying, Charlie, you sold at the all-time high, but he didn't, right? And then there's the claim of like market manipulation. Oh, like you claim that the market was going to dip. You called it, right? And then but he was selling his Litecoin, and he was considering this when Litecoin was $96. So this was like well before that tweet, right? And then, like you said, like, why didn't you just wait for the market to dip until it's $30? Well, who knows? You have no guarantees as to which way the market is going to swing. We might guess, like, I called that there would be a huge correction. A lot of people called that there would be a huge correction when Bitcoin hit like $20,000. But honestly, you have no idea how low it's going to go. And so if I had that mentality of like, oh, I'm just going to wait till the price dips and then I'm going to sell it, like that doesn't make sense either, right?
No,
Go ahead.
no, continue.
Okay, and then I'm just saying that like when you have as many followers as Charlie, and when you see that the stuff that you tweet like immediately reflects on the price of not only just Litecoin but Bitcoin too, like that scares. I would be scared, right? And then so from my perspective, I kind of understand why he sold it, because there's that situation is just ripe for people to claim that you are manipulating the market, right? And like as a follower, as someone who follows Charlie on Twitter now, like I don't have to second guess his tweets anymore and think and worry or think about like, wait, is he pumping Litecoin right now so that he can sell a little bit, right? There's none of that dynamic. It's just, oh no, he founded Litecoin, he's the creator, and he's working full time on this project and he's helping it succeed.
No, and I see. I think a lot of like I was going, well, I would have done this or this. I mean, I totally understand that's Monday morning quarterbacking it to the max. I just feel like, in a way, that if his his goal was to not be accused any longer of pumping, you're just pumping your bags, so whatever, that in a way his actions, even though they were counter to it, I personally don't believe there's anything malicious to it. I know some people do. I don't think that there was. I just think that it was basically, I make it as more of a bad PR move than anything else. And he almost kind of played right in to the haters' hands in a way. But I get that. I mean, it hit the size of his following, and the second that he tweets anything, and anybody that's at that level on Twitter, immediately has 50 comments within the first minute of people going every which way. So I understand. I don't understand that dynamic at all. So I didn't want to talk about this so much as that I had a huge issue with it. I understood it, and I don't like to Monday morning quarterback people's specific decisions, but it was something that gets brought up so much that if we're going to have a talk / debate discussion, whatever you're going to want to call it, about Litecoin in general, that for right now it's pretty topical. In a year or 2, 3, it's not. I don't think it's going to be that big of an issue.
Yeah, hopefully not. But like one more thing I wanted to address was like the incentives, right? Like you should have skin in the game if you're going to be working for Litecoin and stuff, right? Because people, I think that's how equity works, right? With corporations and like CEOs, they have equity, so you assume that they're going to work their butt off in order to make the company succeed, and right, and you have stockholders, right? And so to me, it's like, one, like Litecoin isn't equity. It's not a corporation, right? It's a decentralized currency. So there's that perspective. But at the same time, like people think that Charlie stopped working on Litecoin once he sold out. But I'm telling you, like that is like further from the truth, right? Like he is working full time on Litecoin and has been ever since he quit Coinbase. And to me, the evidence is in the pudding, or yeah, something like, there's a phrase
proof
like
in the pudding.
But yeah, there's proof in the pudding, and it's the fact that Litecoin is on almost all major exchanges, right? It's not by accident that happened. It's by Charlie, it's by people in the Litecoin Foundation putting time and effort, reaching out to exchanges, helping them and Litecoin support to those exchanges. And that has put us in such a unique position in the sense that like we don't have to pay to get listed on an exchange. When somebody creates a new cryptocurrency exchange, they automatically list Bitcoin, they automatically list Litecoin, and they automatically list Ethereum. And it's because like we're so liquid, and those are the three currencies that just come to mind when you think like, I need to start an exchange. What are the coins I need to add? Right? And so it's hard because when all you see is Charlie from a distance and he's on Twitter, it's hard to see the grind that he puts in. But as a volunteer on the Litecoin Foundation, it's like it's kind of like night and day.
No, I know, I understand. I don't think. Well, I shouldn't say I don't think anyone would accuse him of, but because I think the amount of hatred that you see at crypto Twitter is, I kind of find it actually enjoyable in a way. It's just kind of funny to me, but I think that I don't think anybody doubts his work ethic, or at least I don't, I should say. But yeah, no, with any of this stuff, and the amount of work that gets done behind the scenes, I think that's with any kind of large group or organization. Most people don't realize, especially people that have never run a business either, really realize how much work it takes to even, run a business with even just 2 or 3 employees. Nonetheless, when you're talking about the size of the the various foundations and groups and stuff that are involved in some of these, in Litecoin and Bitcoin and all that. But yeah, no, I don't doubt his work ethic, and I don't think that some people attribute maliciousness to his actions or what he does. I don't think that's the case at all. But let's just be. I think we've covered Charlie and all that well enough. So yeah, if anybody has any questions, of course, you can always just tweet at Charlie. He'd probably appreciate that.
Oh, he loves it so
but
much.
So let's move back away from personalities to technology. And what I talked about in the episode with Murad and also Kurt, I can't remember if this is specifically what I talked about with Kurt, but was my question about the long-term use case for Litecoin, in a world where not necessarily right now or in a year or two, but let's just say 10 years from now, right? That second layer technology, Lightning Network works. It works successful. It's implemented. It's, we're into mainnet phase, and there's no hiccups. Everything's working smooth. Litecoin adopts, that same tech. So you're going to have to me, it almost seems like they're going to be virtually indistinguishable in terms of the second layer being used when you're looking at it in the macro and long-term view, not the micro. But once it's online and consumer ready, why would I use a Litecoin Lightning Network versus Bitcoin Lightning Network? Not talking about yet going to the settlement later. That'll be a second part of this question. But why would I use the Litecoin Lightning Network versus Bitcoin Lightning Network? Aren't the fees going to be roughly the same? Because they're both going to be meant to be, the daily spender versus the, more long-term storage.
Yeah, so that's a great question, and it's actually something that I get asked a lot. And so to me, it goes back to the faster block times and the cheaper fees. And this is particularly relevant when it comes to establishing a channel. It's faster and cheaper to get on the Lightning Network with Litecoin than it is with Bitcoin. Like with Bitcoin, it takes over an hour right now to establish a channel. With Litecoin, it takes a quarter of that time. And the great thing is, even if you want to own Lightning Bitcoin, all you would have to do is just open a channel with Litecoin and then swap it atomically, right? And so let's look at numbers, right? Right now, the average transaction fee for Bitcoin is about 26 cents. Litecoin is about 2 cents. So if you could own Lightning Bitcoin for 2 cents instead of 26 cents, like, wouldn't you do it? Like, and if you scale this to businesses who would use the Lightning Network, where every cent matters, in my opinion, they'd be incentivized to use Litecoin Lightning channels just to save on fees, like Abra did, but ultimately settle it in Bitcoin. And so, what might this look like in a in a real life setting, right? And so here's an example of how I think this could work. I just talked with the merchant processor, and they told me that he was growing there, that there was a growing customer base that liked to settle their payments into crypto, right? They didn't want to sweep it into fiat, not into USD, not into euro, but they wanted to sweep it into crypto, whether it would be Bitcoin, Litecoin, Ethereum, whatever. And so the service that I think fits into this example is, well, if I'm a customer, I don't want to wait an hour for my channel to be established before I can spend my Lightning Bitcoin, right? I want to wait like 15 minutes, 30 minutes, right? I want it to be fast and I want it to be cheap. And so I can make a payment with my Lightning Litecoin to your store, but on the back end, on the infrastructure end, you would swap it atomically for Bitcoin. And then because the customer would want to keep Bitcoin, they want to settle it in Bitcoin. And so they would keep the Lightning Bitcoin in that way. right? That to me makes sense, right? And in that way, I feel like, Litecoin is actually the cryptocurrency for payments. It is being used in a payment setting, and it makes sense to use Litecoin because it offers the same type of security as Bitcoin, except for less.
Well, I mean, it's not the exact same security, right? Because with the network effect on Bitcoin's always going to be more secure, technically speaking, even if it's still not technically feasible. It's at some point to attack Litecoin's network. If you're looking to attack one network or the other, you would choose Litecoin because it's always going to be smaller than Bitcoin per se, if Bitcoin remains the biggest.
Exactly. Okay, so let me be clear. Bitcoin is the king, right? Like in terms of hash rate security, there's nothing that compares to Bitcoin. At the same time, Litecoin is still pretty secure. And the reason why it's secure is because it's script dominant. And there's a lot of script ASICs out there. So it's still expensive to attack Litecoin, right? Like hash rate can't be rented to attack it. And so from my perspective, it offers somewhat similar security, not the same, but somewhat similar security. And it offers this similar properties of sound money with limited supply, with a decentralized network, with the same properties of hard money. And it kind of makes sense because if you want to move a lot of money, if you want to make sure that you make a payment and that it is 100% secure, like go with Bitcoin, absolutely, right? But like for smaller purchases, it's like not as important. And the analogy here is like maybe writing a check, writing a check for a house or something like that, or an ACH deposit. You want to make sure like that's going to go through and that there's no chance for anything. There's no funny business there. But like in my daily life, we use credit cards, right? And so that's obviously not as secure. Like there can be tons of chargebacks there. And so something similar can be viewed, I guess, like in that metaphor between like Bitcoin and Litecoin.
Hey, I hope that you are enjoying listening to this episode as much as we did recording it. I don't have any sponsorships, so I'd really appreciate if you go over to iTunes, rate and review it 5 stars if you think I'm worthy of it, or wherever you're listening to the podcast right now. If you could also go to our Twitter, our Facebook, our Instagram, any of the social media pages that we have, like and share them. It really helps spread the word. So once again, thanks for listening and enjoy the rest of the show. Okay. We had a few questions from Twitter when we put out the announcement earlier, but it was so back in October, it was announced that fees would be reduced about 10x, if I'm not mistaken. When is that being planned on actually being implemented, or has that been shelved for the time being?
It should hopefully be in 17. The relay fees have been staged because if you don't stage it, then the transactions kind of drop out. And so you just got to do it in a way where the transactions can get propagated by the miners, but then later on the users can get in on there too. So hopefully in 17, it'll be out.
Will Litecoin be adding privacy such as Schnorr before Bitcoin? We kind of already talked about that, but if you wanted to address that anyways.
It's definitely a possibility. I'm not quite sure whether or not there's anything concrete right now to implement it, but yeah, it's possible that we could add Schnorr before Bitcoin.
How do you think Grin will do, and what features should Litecoin be pursuing, if any?
I actually like Grin in the sense that, okay, so this might be a little controversial, but so their supply limit, they don't actually have a supply limit, but their philosophy is that with every block reward, it's going to be the same. And then as the supply grows, the rate of inflation will ultimately go down to 0. I actually think that's pretty interesting because if you look at the Bitcoin and Litecoin network right now, the only thing necessary that is securing the network are the block rewards. And so everybody, the whole goal, the whole plan has been, we've got to secure Bitcoin and Litecoin's network purely through the fees, right? But I I'm not convinced. I'm not 100% sure. I'm 90% sure that it'll work out out that way. But like, there's a 10% part of me that's not 100% convinced that everything will work out that way. And so I think Grin is an interesting hedge, at least from an economic perspective, because they're going to consistently be rewarding their miners, and so that network hash rate security will be there. And obviously, the Mimblewimble is going to be implementing or that they have implemented it's pretty interesting as well. So yeah, I'm a fan of Grin. I'm excited that they're going on mainnet, or they have gone on mainnet, and yeah, we'll see where that project goes.
Now, the last question was, and I thought of a couple more things I wanted to ask you. So after we do this one, but what's the best way to build up Litecoin Lightning Network, or can we just use the Bitcoin Lightning Network channels?
Yeah, I mean, if you have space to run a Bitcoin Lightning Network node, go do it. But definitely the Lightning network for Litecoin is lagging a bit behind. We just broke 100 a couple days ago, so that's pretty cool. I have a guide out for Max. If you can follow it and set it up yourself, I think that's great. It's pretty. This past weekend I helped 3 people kind of put it up, and they're not coders at all, and so it's doable. It's very possible. I think there's also Casa. Their Lightning Network node has Litecoin capabilities inside of it if you put in 1 line of code. But they also said that they're going to make Litecoin available as well sometime in the future and as part of the natural setup. And I think there is also lightninginabox.com. I think they sell pre-assembled Lightning Network Raspberry Pi boxes for Litecoin that you can buy. And so, yeah, I would say those would be the 3 ways that you can try to get involved.
Now, I was just thinking, so as far as, I mean, obviously I know where you fall in the debate as far as for the scaling debate, big block, small block, that we just had a little over a year ago now. But what would be your argument for, and I guess this is less about Litecoin and more just about scaling, but why should someone, especially people who are coming in brand new, be, go like, okay, well, I want to send some stuff. There's all, I want to use a cryptocurrency, to either, send for remittances or whatever. And I want to have cheap fees. Why would I pick, and minus any of the actual personalities that are involved in this, but why should I pick, something like Litecoin versus going, Bitcoin Cash?
Yeah, I mean, because to me, Litecoin has one of the best security in terms of the network, like second to like Bitcoin, and I think Ethereum is probably higher as well. But like Bitcoin Cash's security is just terrible, right? Any Bitcoin miner, any Bitcoin pool can just point like maybe 2-3% of their pool to the Bitcoin Cash chain, and then they get ruined, right? And so if you want stability, I would choose Litecoin. If you want something that's similar to Bitcoin, but cheaper, then I would say use Litecoin. Yeah, it's been around for 7 years. It's consistently in the top 10 in market cap. And yeah, I find it pretty reliable.
And you mentioned a little bit earlier when we were talking about the use case in a post-Lightning Network world.
Hello, are you still there, Dustin?
Can you hear me? Hello?
Okay. Yeah, okay, maybe one more point I'd like to...
Are you still there?
Point out is, how about this? Yeah, so kind of how I view Bitcoin and Litecoin is like this. I hold Bitcoin, and I view Bitcoin like I view my savings retirement or my savings funds or my retirement fund. Like I don't ever plan to spend my Bitcoin on anything until like, it's enough to like carry me through, right? But on the other hand, I have no problems when it comes to spending Litecoin. I paid for my VPN with Litecoin. I paid for my Ledger Nano S with Litecoin. A couple of weeks ago, I just bought like this Superman Litecoin shirt from the foundation. So I use Litecoin for payments because honestly, like the opportunity cost isn't as high to me if I spend Litecoin, but it kind of is for Bitcoin. And so when people talk about Bitcoin as a store of value, I really, really do view it as a store of value and as something that I'm not going to actually ever spend. But with Litecoin, it's I feel like it's more justifiable because there's more of it. It's more stable in price, and it's just cheaper, and so yeah.
So I got cut off, so I wasn't trying to like re-ask that. I appreciate, and I'll hold that in there. But I wasn't trying to like re-ask the use case scenario again. I was trying to I was getting at was when we talked about the use case scenario. You mentioned atomic swaps.
Yeah.
And I was wondering, and since we kind of didn't explain that at all, I was wondering if you could go in, talk about atomic swaps, what they are and how they would actually function within these Lightning networks between Litecoin and Bitcoin.
Yeah. Okay. So for people who don't know, atomic swaps basically means I can swap my Litecoin for Bitcoin atomically, so it happens or it doesn't happen at all. And so if somewhere along the line the route fails or something, then the atomic swap doesn't go through. And so it offers a very secure way to swap Litecoin for Bitcoin. How might this work in a real world setting, right? When I think one example is like the merchant within the merchant setting, where Bitcoin is kind of like the settlement layer, and how Lightning Network, let's just call it Lightning Litecoin. When Lightning Litecoin is used to pay for stuff, and then the merchant, they want to settle, and so you would swap the Litecoin immediately for Lightning Bitcoin, and then they would hold that on their end. But like in the future, moving forward, a lot of this stuff I feel like is going to be abstracted, right? And so you won't actually really know whether or not you're using Bitcoin or Litecoin underneath, like for these games that you might be playing or these services that you might be paying for. And so it's very possible, right, that banks would choose to use Lightning Litecoin to make payments faster and cheaper than with Lightning Bitcoin. And ultimately it would be Bitcoin that would act as like kind of like the settlement layer for everything, for the whole economy, for the whole world, and become like the Bitcoin, become the standard. And so I think that's kind of how ultimately I can see it. There's also the application, the use case of dexes. You can hold and trade Litecoin for Bitcoin non-custodially, and it's going to be fantastic. And it's going to be a true DEX as opposed to something like Radar Relay, where it's kind of centralized around an order book, but it's possible to implement atomic swaps per node. And so if the order book is gone, there's no central company to shut down the DEX or to shut down the atomic swap. So yeah, that's kind of how I can see it. And there's this also really cool use case where with HTLCs, and atomic swaps, it makes for a great derivative exchange, and it's always going to be fully backed because it's because you're using Bitcoin and Litecoin, and it's backed by the HTLCs that you use and the swap that you have. But that's also something that could be really interesting if there's anybody out there who wants to build a Lightning Network derivative-based exchange. I think there might be something there for you.
Is there any scenario in which you would consider changing your mind and going full Bitcoin?
Yeah, it's a possibility. If the devs stop deving, if the community dies, if the network gets completely wrecked or destroyed, if I lose confidence in the overall vision of the project, then absolutely, yeah. Then, it's kind of funny because I kind of share a lot of views that Bitcoin maximalists might have. Like when they look at Ethereum, when they look at permission blockchains, I don't think Ethereum can scale. Or I don't think it is scalable, and that the nodes right now are just like too big. And to me, it doesn't make sense why like all these people are trying to build dApps on top of it. And like with permission blockchains, it's pointless, right? Like what you can do everything in a permission blockchain with a centralized database with like append-only logs. And so, I have those very similar sentiments in that sense. And so it's quite possible that I might end up becoming a Bitcoin maximalist if the Litecoin project completely fails.
And I'll make sure I make that as just the quote for the episode without any context
Please
at all.
Do. Absolutely. Do it.
Was there anything that you wanted? Because I know that you're also involved with like I said, the creator of LiteSchool and also Blockfuse. Is there anything that you wanted to talk about in regards to them?
Okay, actually, I know this is kind of unorthodox, but would you mind if I kind of rehash like the beginning question of the podcast?
Yeah, of course.
So Litecoin has been around for 7 years, and it has consistently been in the top 10 in market cap. It's been a blockchain that has never had any downtime, zero downtime. And to be honest, that's something that Bitcoin can't even claim. Like they were down for like a few hours between zero point 0.7 and 0.8. And Litecoin, I believe, serves a real purpose in this space, like in service to the whole crypto economy. And that purpose is as a test bed for Bitcoin, right? It implemented SegWit first. It kind of dispelled the SegWit FUD before it got implemented on Bitcoin. And so, and this applies to other technologies in the future that other people might want to implement, like Schnorr or confidential transactions. Um, it also helps offload transactions from Bitcoin. And we saw this in November, December of 2017 when the fees for Bitcoin got crazy high. And so actually traders, what they ended up doing is they traded Bitcoin for Litecoin and they sent Litecoin to all these different exchanges. And I also am really excited about like the future of Litecoin with the Lightning Network and atomic swaps. And so to me, it just has a lot more going for it than a lot of other coins, especially even on the liquidity side, because a lot of these ICO projects are kind of like paying to get listed on exchanges, but Litecoin is already there. And Litecoin to me, like ultimately, it's about like sound money. It's about like hard money. And so, when people say, "Oh yeah, Litecoin is the silver to Bitcoin's gold," that's something that I actually believe in. It offers the same properties as sound money in terms of limited supply. It's censorship resistant. It's saleable, except for less, right? Like it's cheaper. It's not equal in terms of security to Bitcoin, but it's comparable. And so I guess for me, those are the reasons why I believe Litecoin, like why I believe other people should invest in Litecoin. And if you're a Bitcoin maximalist, like then maybe pull like a Jameson Lopp and like hold Litecoin as like a token of support, because I want to let you know, like you Bitcoin maximalists, that Litecoin exists to help you, to help Bitcoin, and not to compete or overtake it in any sense of the phrase. Yeah.
No, as far as for I think that you guys should not use the silver to gold.
Yeah.
I really don't like that, because it's not an apples to apples comparison, because gold, the reason we had silver, brass or whatever is because when you have like even like a 10th ounce gold coin, which is like the size of an American dime, or I think it's like a 1 or 2 cent euro piece, but anyways, even that amount is enough to buy like a whole, well, depending on exactly what you buy, but say roughly a shopping cart full of food. So that's not practical. So to carry anything smaller than that. So that's why we did have it. So I've always disliked that analogy. It's just because the reason that there was a silver to the gold was to have a smaller divisible coin that you could use for smaller transactions, where with the divisibility of Bitcoin and Litecoin as well, they can be used, right, without talking about fees and stuff, interchangeably. But
so I guess like the argument is because we have fiat that offers like divisibility, or maybe even like sub satoshis on the Lightning Network, like Litecoin isn't needed anymore. Is that kind of like the argument?
No, just that when you're saying silver to gold, you're almost saying like, well, you can't use Bitcoin for for smaller transactions. When you're kind of talking about fees, yeah, in a way. But right now it's at what you said, like 26 cents for Bitcoin. If you're doing a $5 thing, that's not a huge deal. When you start talking about 2017, we're talking about $50 fees or whatever it was. I can't remember what we were peaking out at. then that makes kind of sense. But absent, I don't know, just like it always kind of bothered me a bit, because especially when once you go over to Lightning Network, then there is no more silver to gold analogy necessarily, unless you start talking about settlement layers. But
yeah, so like on that note, I kind of think of it like in the long term, because it's still to me the metaphor exists within the fees,
okay,
right? Because yes, you can have sub Satoshi stuff, payments on the Lightning Network. Absolutely true. I give you that, right? But it's still expensive. Like hypothetically, when we get to the point where fees are paying for everything, it's going to be crazy expensive to get on there, right? And so you need something that is comparable in its security for less, that offers you the same properties as sound money. And to me, that's Litecoin. And like, I think Saifedean, sorry if I messed up your name. By the way, loved your book. I think you're fantastic. I respect your opinions so much, right? But I kind of disagree with you in this one point, or a couple points, when you said that, or when he said that, now that we have fiat, silver isn't needed, right? And so what can be abstracted from that is, if Bitcoin is gold, then there's no need for Litecoin. But to me, Bitcoin is a global currency, right? And fiat is not. It's still segmented, and you still have to go through all these exchanges between country to country in order for that to work, right? But then Litecoin is also a global currency, and so to me, there's just a bit of a disconnect there, where I would kind of like push back a little bit.
And the last thing that I wanted to, and you'd mention it, so it kind of brought it back up to me, was that you're saying that Litecoin is not competing with Bitcoin, and that was one other point that to me was an issue, because I have not decided yet, or I guess I have not been presented with enough evidence yet to really make a decision. Some people believe that it's a winner take all. Eventually, Bitcoin will be the only thing left standing, right? That eventually one currency will win. Others believe that that there's no end. It's an infinite game. To say that there's one winner means that the game has ended, right? Because as long as there's time, there's always possibilities of new contenders, right? So, but given either scenario, if you have two coins that are saying that we will be a global currency, right now, at least with Bitcoin BTC, they're saying we're store of value, and eventually down the road, medium of exchange will be found once things get a lot less volatile and more stable and all that kind of good stuff, right? But regardless, is if you're both attempting to be a global currency, whether it's the timelines are a little bit different, there is going to be competition, because every single person that is going to decide to use a coin is going to be, that competition is going to be in their mind, whether or not how much research that they've done or how much knowledge that they have. They're going to go and say, I want to send $100 to grandma, or I want to buy this new car down at the dealership that accepts crypto. Which one am I going to pick? And to me, that's a competition. They are competing in your mind, and that is really where the competition lies. Is all the economics, all the fundamentals, all the technology, all boils down to, I don't want to say marketing, because that's just being a little bit myopic, I guess. But it's you're fighting for the hearts and minds of every single user. Almost 8 billion of us now, and to me, while the community may not be necessarily going like, what can we do to kick Bitcoin's butt and take over their spot, the competition is happening in a way, kind of underneath anything that's any of the actions that are being taken. It's still happening. Every single crypto that's out there trying to actually be like a spendable currency, not, I guess, Ethereum in a way. Some people do use it as money. I don't know really anybody, but I'm sure there is somebody. But any of them that are saying, like Dash or Bitcoin Cash or Bitcoin SV now, or whatever the plethora that are out there now, they're all fighting that mental battle for users of saying like, use us, here's why.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you believe that there's only going to be one currency to serve the entire world, you have every right to believe that. And I think, hearing you explain that perspective, it makes sense why people might feel threatened by something like Litecoin, right? Where we're trying to say, hey, like we're trying to help you, we're trying to complement you, but from your perspective, you're like, no, 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 no. There's just only going to be one. And so I think that I can appreciate that mentality and that perspective. But alternatively, I just kind of want to throw this example out. Like when you look at what Litecoin did and like what Bitcoin Cash did, those are two worlds, they're worlds apart, right? One of it, Bitcoin Cash, they took hash rate from you. They have the same mining algorithm as you, SHA 256. They took a couple devs from you, right? But with Litecoin, we didn't hard fork from your code base. We have a different mining algorithm. We have a whole separate community. And in fact, we have a live network that's worth something, that's valuable for you to test things on. So you can know that within a properly incentivized mainnet cryptocurrency, that attackers can try to attack this new technology, whatever it is that it is being implemented. They have the appropriate incentives to try to break it, right? And if that's the case, then I think there is room and space for both of these coins to kind of coexist. Yeah, and I think a lot of people saw that. Like even Eric Lombroso, like he's a Bitcoin core dev. Like I think he even saw and recognized like the value of Litecoin during the whole UASF movement. And even even Francis Pilliot from Canada. Oh gosh, I butchered his name. He saw that. Like if you look at his tweets, he saw that. Like recently, for whatever reason, he's just been on a rant about how Litecoin is a scam. But if you look at his tweets during that time, he was like, "Oh yeah, Litecoin actually served a unique use case as a testbed for Bitcoin, right?" And so I think people, uh, if you have, even if you believe that there is one world currency, you still need a testing or a staging environment to test technology on. And I think in that way, Litecoin can be valuable.
No, and I get that. I just, I mean, I guess I don't need to go over because I just explain my position. But I feel like regardless of intentions, and it doesn't even have to be a winner take all, but there's always a competition, even between something like, well, I guess that's a bad example. I was going to say like Honda and Acura because they're two different types of vehicles, but even though it's the same company, they're going after a different demo. But even I can't think of a good analogy at the time right now, but I'll think of something in about 5 minutes. Even if we're not actively seeking competition, we're always in competition. Even if we're like in a workplace environment and we're not going like, oh, I'm in competition with John over here because we're both on, this team, and eventually we all want to become the manager, in this position. But I'm not necessarily going like John's my competition. You are in a way. Your actions all end up leading to some sort of end result, whether or not you or John or neither of you gets that right. So, that's I guess to try to explain my thinking a little bit, to clarify it a little bit more. It's that it doesn't have to be like this is what we're seeking out to do, but the competition in all of life is always constant in every aspect. But I think.
Yeah. So here's the disconnect that I have though, right? Like,
Okay.
if you think Bitcoin is going to be the one currency and you're so confident in it and you think Bitcoin is the best, then like I get the sense that they feel threatened, right? Like let's say that competition is true,
Mm-hmm.
like there's some indirect competition always, and okay, let's take that. And so like are you scared? Are you scared we're going to take market share? Are you scared that Litecoin is going to be more valuable than Bitcoin? Because that to me would be justification to be so angry and call everything a scam and all that stuff like that, then I would be like, okay, I understand where that's coming from. But if you're completely confident that there's going to be one world currency and it's going to be Bitcoin, then I mean, wouldn't you just be wasting your time, wasting your breaths, doing all that stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is exactly some of the issues that I've had with some people in the in the maximalist side is that I understand from one perspective when they say like, we do this because we think if X is a scam, we're not going to keep our our ourselves quiet and say that. But I also go like especially when it came down to the Bitcoin Cash, and I kind of understand their argument a little bit better than I did at first, but if mere brand hijacking is enough to derail what's supposed to be the next global money, and we're supposed to be taking on central banks and those powerful institutions that have ever existed in the world, then we've got a real problem here.
Yeah.
And so I do think that there is, they wouldn't, people, what, I'm not saying that they are actually scared and they just, don't want to say it. I don't think that they realize that it is when they go after a different project, a coin, whatever it is, fiat, it's because it is in direct competition.
Mm-hmm.
And I understand why you would have a threatening, a feeling of being threatened because, especially from their perspective, this is the best way for humanity to basically free ourselves of, all the kind of really bad stuff that has come out of central bank manipulations in fiat currencies and be able to fund these, wars all over and debts racked up to 20 trillion that we'll never be able to pay and $200 trillion in liabilities. I understand if you're going like, this is the best way to do it. And from their perspective, the only way to, and I'm very sympathetic to that view, that you would feel anything is just distracting and making this take longer. So I do understand exactly what you're saying, and I kind of have that same perspective of if you do believe this thing is going to win regardless, then it's really not that big of a deal. But then on the other hand, too, like I said, like you see something come out like BitConnect. Well, I mean that's just such a shining example, but like smaller coins or other things that are kind of permission blockchains and centralized that are attempting to do the same thing as Bitcoin, quote unquote, but not actually at all. I get why they would say like, we have a duty to call out things that are going to fool people, make them lose money, time, and also derail what could be the most important project. So I understand both sides, but I very much, I take your point. So I was wondering if you wanted to go over the LiteSchool and any other projects that you're working on, anything that you want people to know about, where to find you, and the best way to get a hold of you.
Yeah, so I created the Light School, and it's basically everything Litecoin. It has introductory articles for newcomers. If you're scared, if cryptocurrency seems so intimidating, I highly recommend you check out my newcomer series. I also have a technology section for those who are more further along in their cryptocurrency experience. I break down mass, I break down confidential transactions, I talk about nodes, the Lightning Network, obviously, and yeah, and so it's just a resource for people to kind of look and to learn, because I really do believe, in order for Litecoin and Bitcoin to succeed, people have to get educated. It's not good enough that people buy it just for the price, but they have to really understand what's happening, like the importance of running a full node and how it all works. Because if you lose that, if you lose the knowledge, then you lose the censorship resistance. And so that's why I put so much of my time into it. And then, yeah, I am also the COO of Blockfuse. It's a startup that I did with my partner, Patrick Walters. And we make Bitcoin and Litecoin app development easy. And we do that through our open source platform, CoinMesh. It automates Bitcoin nodes and adapter layers. And so, like, for example, we launched a couple months ago an LND dev environment, and it'll get you set up within 30 minutes flat. And so if you are trying to build apps on the Lightning Network and you're completely frustrated, check out CoinMesh because it'll automate the whole process for you. And yeah, if you want to follow me, I'm on Twitter at eCurrencyHodler. And yeah.
It was that earlier you mentioned that you'd made up a guide for Litecoin Lightning Network. Is that also on the LiteSchool or?
Oh, actually, it's on my GitHub. I should put a link there. Actually, that's a really good point. Yeah, but it's on my GitHub. If you type in eCurrency hodler on GitHub, you'll find it, and it's under the code base Litecoin resources.
Okay, and I'll get that. I'll have you send that to me, and because I'll put all the stuff that we talked about, all the any of the links to anything, any of the people or companies that we've mentioned here, and I'll have those all in the show notes, as well as when I put this out on Twitter, it'll be like in the second or third tweet. I have the things we mentioned and all that kind of stuff in there. But Andrew, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Hey, thanks for having me. And I really appreciate you having like an open mind and being willing to have like a civil discussion, because I think lately it's been kind of crazy with some of the debates that I've been seeing. So definitely appreciate that, Dustin.
Yeah, no problem. And we'll talk again soon.